Ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Imagine discovering your own photo on a dating app. Not by your choice, but because your partner used it to test your loyalty. This is a story about love strained by insecurities, where the ghosts of past betrayals collide with a fragile present, leaving trust in tatters. What started as a seemingly harmless experiment quickly spiraled into heartbreak, forcing a couple to confront the cracks in their relationship. Can love survive when respect and trust are on the line? Let's dive into this emotional roller coaster and find out. It started like a bad joke, or maybe just a weird coincidence. One day, I was scrolling through my phone, absent-mindedly checking notifications, when my girlfriend walked in, her face a mix of curiosity and something I couldn't quite place. That night, her friends were over, laughing a little too loudly, whispering in corners. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just girls being girls. But a couple of days later, I noticed she was glued to her phone, her expression shifting between smirks and furrowed brows. Something felt off. A week later, I caught a glimpse of her screen, my picture. A recent one, actually, but it wasn't on her feed or in her gallery. It was on Tinder. My heart stopped. She wasn't cheating on me, was she? No, that didn't make sense. But then, why was I there? Turns out, her friends had set up the account. Just a little test, they called it. My name, my photo, but an entirely fabricated persona beneath. They giggled as they explained, showing her matches I supposedly made. My mind raced. It felt like a prank gone too far, but my girlfriend didn't seem as amused as her friends. She looked relieved. Or was it guilty? That night, the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. I stared at the ceiling, piecing things together. Was this her idea? Did she really not trust me? Or was there something deeper I didn't understand? Something about her reaction felt deliberate, but I wasn't ready to ask yet. The next morning, her words hit me like a slap in the face. "I've been cheated on before," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't even meet my eyes. I needed to know if I could trust you. Trust me? I wanted to scream, but instead, I stood there trying to process what she'd just admitted. Her past wasn't news to me, but I never imagined it still haunted her like this. She recounted her story, how someone she loved had shattered her, how she spent nights crying over unanswered questions. My gut twisted. I hated the idea of anyone hurting her, but did that justify what she'd done now? Her friends had planted the seed, but she had watered it. She let them drag me into her paranoia. Every word she said made me feel smaller. I wanted to tell her how much I loved her, that I wasn't like the others, but she wouldn't stop talking. The pain she carried was real, no doubt about it. I just wasn't sure why I was the one paying for mistakes someone else made. It was as if every crack in her past was now a fault line in our relationship. Later that day, I kept replaying the conversation in my mind. Her honesty was raw, but it didn't make this any easier to swallow. I felt trapped in someone else's story, cast in a role I never auditioned for. Could I ever be more than a shadow of her past? Could we? The realization hit me in waves, each one heavier than the last. They'd used me in their little experiment without my consent. My photo, my name, my entire identity, twisted into some bizarre loyalty test. I couldn't believe it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I wasn't just blindsided, I was humiliated. How could they think this was okay? I confronted her that night, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, every word sharp with disbelief. She fumbled for an explanation, something about how it wasn't really me on the account, as if that made it better. But it was me, at least to the strangers swiping right and messaging me. It felt like a violation I couldn't quite describe. What made it worse was how casual her friends seemed about it all. "We didn't mean any harm," one of them had said earlier, laughing it off like it was a harmless prank. But it wasn't harmless. It was my life, my trust, and now my anger simmering beneath the surface. I didn't sign up for this, and I certainly didn't deserve it. That night I lay awake, my mind a storm of emotions. The person I trusted most had let this happen. She hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it completely. And as much as I wanted to believe her intentions were good, the damage was done. What was I supposed to do with this betrayal? Her friends weren't just passive players in this. They were the architects. They set the wheels in motion, crafting the fake account and carefully curating my profile. When they showed it to her, they must have thought they were doing her a favor, like they were protecting her from some potential heartbreak. But the reality, they'd lit a fuse under our relationship without a second thought. I remember overhearing part of their conversation when she confronted them. One of them said, "We just wanted to make sure he wasn't like the others." The others. Those words hung in the air like smoke, choking me even from another room. It wasn't enough that I was innocent. I had to prove it, in the most humiliating way possible thanks to them. What stung the most was how easily they dismissed it. "It's not a big deal," one said, as if my trust wasn't the collateral damage in their little game. They couldn't see the ripple effects they'd caused, or maybe they didn't care. Their loyalty to her blinded them to the harm they'd done to me, to us. By the time she told me about their involvement, I could barely look at her. "And you went along with it?" I asked, my voice trembling between disbelief and hurt. She tried to explain, to deflect, but it all boiled down to one simple fact. The people she trusted most had planted a seed of doubt, and she'd let it grow. How do you unsee something like that? After everything came to light, things between us weren't the same. Every conversation felt heavier, like there was an invisible weight pressing down on both of us. The laughter we used to share was replaced by silence, and when we did talk, it felt like we were walking on eggshells, careful not to crack what little trust was left. I wanted to believe we could fix this, but deep down, I wasn't sure. The worst part was how communication seemed to crumble overnight. I couldn't bring myself to open up, and she seemed too scared to push. Every time her phone buzzed, I felt a pang of paranoia I hated myself for feeling. It was like the roles had reversed. I was now the one questioning, doubting, second-guessing. She'd say things like, "I just need time to rebuild this." But her actions didn't match her words. If she wanted trust, why did it feel like she was still keeping something from me and me? I wasn't blameless either. I'd start arguments over little things, not because they mattered, but because I couldn't shake the anger that still lingered. Eventually, I began to wonder if we were even speaking the same language anymore. The person I'd once felt so connected to now felt like a stranger. Every unresolved fight, every awkward silence, it all seemed to pile up, creating a wall we couldn't seem to climb. Was this how relationships broke apart? Not with a single blow, but with 1,000 tiny cracks? It became clear that this wasn't just about one mistake. Her actions, her doubts, they were part of a larger pattern, one that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her unresolved trust issues. It was like she was trapped in a cycle, replaying her past relationships in her mind, dragging me into battles I never started. I wasn't her ex, but to her, I might as well have been. She'd apologize in one breath and justify her actions in the next. "I've been hurt before," she'd say, as if that excused everything. And while I wanted to empathize, it felt like every apology was just another way to avoid addressing the real problem. She wasn't fighting for us, she was fighting her own demons, and I was caught in the crossfire. I started noticing other patterns too. The way she'd probe for reassurance, the way she'd read into harmless situations and turn them into something more. It wasn't just about the fake Tinder account, it was about the way she approached trust altogether. And the more I saw it, the harder it became to ignore. This wasn't healthy, for either of us. I wanted to help her, to show her that I wasn't the enemy, but every attempt felt like a losing battle. How do you convince someone to trust when their default is doubt? How do you stay when every sign points to a storm you can't weather alone? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much respect had been lost on both sides. Her decision to let her friends create that fake account, her willingness to go along with it, felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built together. But I wasn't innocent either. My growing resentment had led me to say things I couldn't take back, to treat her with the same dismissiveness I resented in her actions. It wasn't just about the Tinder account anymore. It was the principle behind it. She'd chosen to test me instead of trust me, and in doing so, she'd shown how little faith she had in who I was. And my response, I let that bitterness seep into every interaction we had, fueling arguments that only pushed us further apart. Looking back, I could see the small cracks that had formed even before this. Moments where we didn't communicate, where we let assumptions take the place of honest conversations. The Tinder fiasco didn't create the disrespect, it just amplified it. Neither of us was willing to admit how much damage we'd done until it was too obvious to ignore. And yet, part of me still hoped we could fix it. Maybe it was naive, but I wanted to believe there was something worth salvaging. But how do you rebuild respect when it's been so carelessly discarded? Could we even start again? Or was this just the beginning of the end? When I finally shared the story online, partly to vent and partly to get perspective, the response was overwhelming. People flooded the comments, dissecting every detail, offering advice, and of course, choosing sides. The most common suggestion: she needs therapy. At first, I brushed it off, but the more I read, the harder it was to ignore the pattern everyone seemed to notice. Comment after comment echoed the same sentiment. Her insecurities were steering the relationship into dangerous territory. Some were sympathetic, saying things like, "She's been through a lot, maybe she just needs help processing." Others were harsher, accusing her of projecting her issues onto me. It was strange seeing strangers analyze us like characters in a drama, but their words hit closer to home than I expected. What caught me off guard was how many people pointed out my role in all of this. "You've got to decide if this is something you're willing to work through," one user wrote. Another said, "Trust is a two-way street, and resentment isn't going to fix anything." It wasn't easy to hear, but they weren't wrong. I'd been so focused on her flaws, I hadn't taken a good look at my own. By the time I finished scrolling through the comments, I felt more conflicted than ever. Was this just a bump in the road, or a sign of something bigger? And even if therapy could help her, what about us? Could we both face our issues together, or were we already too far gone? The fallout from everything lingered, even in moments when we tried to move past it. Little things that used to feel normal, like holding hands or laughing at inside jokes, now felt strained, almost forced. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the uncertainty it left behind. Could we ever truly trust each other again? I found myself questioning things I'd never doubted before. Was she being honest when she smiled at me? Was I overthinking it when she hesitated before answering a question? It was exhausting, living in this constant state of second-guessing. And yet, walking away felt just as impossible as staying. We'd built a life together, but now it felt like it was balancing on a razor's edge. She tried to fix things in her own way. Little gestures, kind words, even promises to be better. But the damage wasn't something that could be fixed with a few sweet moments. Trust takes time to rebuild, and neither of us seemed to know where to start. Every step forward seemed to come with a step back, a reminder of what had been broken. Late at night, when the world was quiet, the doubts crept in. Could we really build a future on such a shaky foundation? I wanted to believe we could, but the cracks were too deep to ignore. Every plan we'd made, every dream we'd shared, it all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Would time heal us, or was this the beginning of the end? Her words were like a melody I wanted to believe in, but her actions played a different tune entirely. She'd tell me she loved me, that she wanted a future with me, but then she'd act in ways that tore at the very fabric of that promise. It wasn't just about the fake Tinder account anymore. It was the constant tug-of-war between what she said and what she did. I'd catch glimpses of the girl I fell for, The way she'd light up when we talked about our dreams. The way she'd squeeze my hand like she never wanted to let go. But then, there'd be moments that left me questioning everything. A careless comment, a look that lingered too long, small things that spoke louder than her words ever could. It wasn't just her, though. I knew I wasn't making things easier. My frustration boiled over in ways I wasn't proud of, my sarcasm cutting deeper than I intended. It was like we were both stuck in a cycle of trying and failing, each of us too stubborn or scared to admit how much we were hurting. Love shouldn't feel like a battlefield, but that's exactly what we turned it into. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, I couldn't shake the contradictions. How could someone who claimed to love me so much do something that hurt me so deeply? And how could I claim to want this to work when I couldn't let go of the resentment? We were trapped, circling the same questions with no clear answers in sight.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.